Hi, my name is Dor Dali, and I'm Director of Information Security at Vulcan Cyber. In today's session, I want to speak with you about a slightly different approach to deal with vulnerabilities. We, as security personnel, we tend to spend a lot of time with dealing with vulnerabilities in our organizations. And in this session, the main goal is to think about a different approach that can help us to minimize the time that we spend, and also the time that takes us from being vulnerable to be secure. I want to start by looking at the vulnerability lifecycle and to look at the common approach of the vulnerability lifecycle. First of all, an exploit is found, and then the vendor is notified. Then a CVE is get released for this specific issue, and then we have to wait for the fix. Then the fix is being released, and then we need to deploy it. As we all see, all of this life cycle is based on the word wait. We need to wait for the vendor to be notified by the researcher, or at least to be notified that there is a vulnerability in their system. We need to wait for the vendor to contact the Mitre organization or other CVE register and to notify them about the fact that there is a bug in their system, and to have CVE assigned a CVE ID for that. We need to wait for the vendor to release a fix, which can take a lot of time. And then we need to wait internally for the fix to be deployed, because most of the time, and most likely, deploying the fix would require some maintenance in our systems. So I guess we can agree that this flow is pretty much broken and it's not working. Let's look about different reasons why it's not working. First of all, the number of new vulnerabilities is always on the rise. As you can see, and I got the numbers right here, the number of new CVEs in 2020 was a lot higher than the number of new CVEs of 2019. And I can tell you that the numbers of CVEs in 2021 is already almost in par with the numbers of the CVEs that were released in 2020. And we're not even by the end of the year yet. Second of all, as we said, fixes take time to release. As we know, the time that after a CVE, the time that we need to wait for a fix to be released can be a couple of days, it can be a couple of weeks, it can be a couple of years, or in the worst cases, it can be never, because this package is no longer maintained, it's out end of life, or whatsoever reason. And this means that our organization will be always vulnerable up until someone will decide to finally release a fix for that. The third issue is the fact that we always hear about new big impact breaches. And obviously, we as an organization, we don't want to be there. We don't want to be in the headline of the news that's saying that our company got breached. And the last one, which is the main one, at least I believe in this for this session, is the fact that once the CVE got released and there was a fix that got released or some workaround or whatsoever, all of the attackers are focusing on that specific product and on that specific vulnerability to find some more flows in that area. And that means that there are tons of many new eyes and new bad eyes that are looking at the same thing altogether. Let's look at a different approach, an approach that is more risk-based and less based on weight. So when an exploit is being found and the vendor is notified about that exploit, either by the attacker that found the bug or some white-hat researcher, and then a CVEs get released, we as security personnel can drill down into the information of that CVE. And by doing some drill down to that information, we can create a workaround. And this workaround, and from that moment that we deploy that workaround, we are secure. That means that we already minimize the amount of wait that we need to wait between the phase that we are unsecure and vulnerable to the phase that we are secure. And that's pretty much driving the cyber risks of our organization down. First of all, by reducing the attack surface. And those are a couple of examples for workarounds that we can deploy for many different CVEs and many different vulnerabilities. First of all, if we see that the vulnerability is in a feature in a product that we are using, but in a feature that we are not using, why not disable it? I mean, we don't need this feature. So why do we need to have a bigger attack surface just because there is some unused feature in our service? Second of all, is limiting the network access. And by limiting the network access, there are a lot of meanings for that. But one of them could be even deploying some WAF or IDS and to monitor some bad or some malicious network access to our systems. We can also change the default configurations, as most likely the attacker would try to use some ready-made POC that he found online, would just use a default configuration. And the best thing about doing all of those, we are also making ourselves future-proof. Because if, for example, there is a bug in some specific feature, and then 2 weeks later, and I'll show you a good example for that in the next slide. And so if 2 weeks later there is another bug in the same feature, we will no longer be vulnerable for that bug because we have just disabled this feature. So, and the main benefits that we get for that is, first of all, there is less wait. We don't need to wait for a fix. Second of all, we can deploy multiple fixes at the same time. I mean, as I said, if we have a couple of vulnerabilities in the same feature, because all the attackers just focused on that feature after one CVE, we can just deploy all the fixes together and then reduce maintenance needs as well, and to have all of that together. Let's just look at one good use case from 1 month ago. Apache 2.449 had 4 CVEs in it. 2 CVEs were relating to mod proxy, and 2 CVEs were directory traversal and remote code execution. Also, it's very important to emphasize that the new release of 2.450 was only in the market for 3 days up until there was new CVE assigned to that, and the new release was 2.451, just 3 days between that. Also, each one of those CVEs were attributed to more than one researchers. And that, as we said, all the researchers are just focusing on all the same code, which makes a lot of sense because they want to try to find bugs. That's their goal. And we also saw a lot of exploits like in the wild, even before the CVEs got assigned, which means that a lot of companies were vulnerable and we might even got exploited while in the time between the CVE got assigned up until a fix was released. And actually, just by doing 2 simple workarounds, as disabling the ModCGI component in the Apache, or just changing some very small config line in the Apache config, you can just make yourself secure and less vulnerable, and not even need to deploy 3 different fixes in less than a month. You could just deploy 1 fix and to be secure and still be secured during all this process. So that's pretty much a slightly new approach to deal with vulnerabilities, mainly being focused on workarounds. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach me out in the email. Thank you very much.